The porch had always been the house's quiet mouth, the place that swallowed what the family didn't want said in the dining room. That night, it swallowed me. Caleb's promotion party overflowed from the Fayetteville ballroom. Crystal, brass, a river of uniforms, more decoration than duty. My father's portrait in dress blues watched over the mantel like a third host. My own face was missing from every arrangement, as usual. I'd made my peace with the erasure until he decided to narrate it. He intercepted me near the French doors, the kind smile he saved for senators switched off. Inside is for legacies. His hand turned the knob and guided me outward with 2 fingers at my shoulder, gentler than a shove, crueler than a strike. The porch, he said, voice pitched for nearby ears, is for disappointments. Laughter didn't follow, but something worse did. Approval disguised as silence. I stepped onto the boards and let the door close behind me. The humid air pressed against my skin. Cicadas droned like an endless drill. The old porch chair creaked when I sat, a sound I knew from childhood. Exile had a geography, and this was it. In my pocket, my thumb found the edge of a small silver pin, Orion Division's insignia, plain enough to be mistaken for a coin. I ran a finger over it, the way Colonel Shaw once rolled tissues across her knuckles and asked me, "Are you okay?" No one in that house had ever asked me that and meant it. I breathed until the sting in my throat flattened into something colder. Through the glass, I could see the party moving in choreographed loops. My father laughed with a brigadier he'd mentored. Caleb shook hands he didn't need to remember. Guests drifted toward the mantel to admire the family portrait, father at center, mother anchored by pearls, Caleb ranked just to his right. The space where a daughter might have been was filled by a vase. The arrangement was deliberate. Our house did nothing by accident. A waiter cracked the door to pass me a napkin and a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. He glanced toward the family, hesitated as if he'd placed me before and couldn't reconcile the memory with this seat. "Ma'am?" he said softly, then retreated to the ballroom's safer gravity. The door opened wider a minute later, not for a server, but for an old man who moved like he'd been built by orders. Spine straight despite the years, steps measured as if time itself still took roll call. His tuxedo hung wrong on a body that remembered field gear. The scar at his temple caught the porch light when he turned his head. "Master Sergeant Hale," my father called from inside, the warmth in his voice reserved for men who made him look larger. "You remember the layout." It was almost a joke. Hale nodded, but his attention had already shifted. He studied me the way NCOs study terrain, checking lines of approach, noting what had been hidden, calculating what still could be. When his eyes reached mine, something resolved. He stepped fully onto the porch, boots, battered civilian leather, finding the plank that never squeaked. Old habit. "Ma'am," he said, and it wasn't a test of manners. He was reading bearing, not rank. Inside, a toast began, glasses raised, father's profile turned to receive light. I heard the familiar cadence of his voice as it rolled out the words service and sacrifice, like he'd invented them. Hale didn't look back. He drew himself up, shoulders squaring against the sum of every parade he'd ever marched. Then he lifted his hand. The salute was clean, not theatrical, not nostalgic. Regulation perfect, given not to my father's portrait or to the room that had exiled me, but to me. "General Ward, ma'am." he said. For a second, the house forgot how to breathe. The word general shot through the glass and cracked against my father's speech. Heads turned toward the porch the way people look when a truth slips out of its leash. I didn't move. I let the salute land where the banishment had. In my pocket, the silver pin pressed into my palm, cool as a fact. I met Hale's eyes and nodded once. Acknowledgement, not acceptance. The porch chair was still creaking beneath me, the night still thick, my father still framed in his legend. But the air had changed. Inside was for legacies, he had said. Out here, one had just chosen me. But before I tell you what happened that night, before I explain why a retired sergeant's salute could cut louder than my father's condemnation, I have to tell you how the scar was carved in the first place. It began 8 winters earlier with a field exercise at West Point, a frozen culvert, and a decision I've never regretted, even though it cost me everything. It was the kind of winter day that looks clean from a distance, snow packed white against gray sky, but inside it was brittle, ready to snap. We had been ordered to cross a training sector near the Hudson, ice ridges marking the edges of the course. Our platoon leader was Lieutenant Miller, young, sharp creases in his uniform, but soft where it mattered most. He wanted the exercise to move quickly, to impress the visiting brass with tempo. Orders came down. Move as directed, stay on schedule. But the culvert ahead sagged under snowpack, a hollow gash disguised as solid ground. I saw it first. Years of hiking with my grandmother in the Blue Ridge had taught me how to read the subtle slouch of snow, the way it curves wrong when water eats beneath. I called it out. Miller waved me down. Proceed as ordered, Cadet Ward. Confidence in command is half the battle. Confidence, I knew, wouldn't hold ice. I looked at the squad. Half were first years, boots still blistering. The thought of them plunging into freezing water, weighed by rucks and rifles, made my stomach knot. I repeated the warning. He cut me off. Cadet, you're not here to improvise. You're here to follow. The squad shifted uneasily. But training is gravity. You follow rank until it breaks you. They stepped toward the culvert. I broke. I shouted the order myself. Left flank, 30 meters. Now authority wasn't mine to wield, but instinct was louder. I pushed the nearest cadet by the ruck strap, dragging him offline. Others followed, some from trust, some from reflex. We veered, boots crunching in sync. Miller's voice barked behind me, calling insubordination. I didn't stop. We skirted wide, hearts racing, and that's when the culvert gave way. The snow collapsed with a roar, water and ice spraying up where we'd stood seconds earlier. Silence followed, broken only by the heaving of our breaths. Every face looked at me, then at the hole. They knew what had almost happened. Miller's jaw clenched. He wasn't relieved, he was furious. His exercise had unraveled in front of witnesses, and in our world, optics were oxygen. Truth didn't matter. Performance did. 2 hours later, in the debrief, Miller wrote it differently. His after-action report described reckless deviation and loss of unit cohesion under my direction. The near disaster became my fault. He framed it as if I had endangered the squad, not saved it. I sat in the room, mud still on my boots, listening as he read it aloud with calm authority. My stomach dropped. Words on paper mattered more than snow in the culvert. I looked to my father, Major General Richard Ward was there that day as a visiting dignitary, a guest brought in to observe cadet evaluations. His presence was ceremonial, not procedural, but his silence carried more weight than any order in the room. He listened, nodding slightly, expression iron. When Miller finished, I waited for my father to correct him, to say, "She was right, she saved lives. That's what leadership looks like." Instead, he folded his hands. "The Army runs on discipline," he said, voice measured. "If Cadet Ward cannot learn that, she does not belong at this institution." It was a knife, sharpened not by anger, but by approval. He wasn't punishing me for being wrong. He was punishing me for being right in a way that embarrassed him. They gave me a form the next day. Voluntary withdrawal. The language was cold, bureaucratic, but the ink carried heat. My father signed as witness. His name bled into the margin where mine faltered. "It's for the best," he said, as if exile could be framed as mercy. "You'll thank me when you're older." I was 19. I never thanked him. Each stroke of the pen on the voluntary withdrawal form felt like a blade slicing through the future I had dreamed of since childhood. Rage pressed against my ribs, but beneath it pooled something colder, a hollow where hope used to live. I walked out with duffels on my shoulders and a silence in my chest, vowing that if I could not carry his legacy, I would carry my own. The day I packed, cadets passed me in the hallways without eye contact. Miller shook my hand in front of the others, whispering, "Learned your lesson yet?" I pulled away. My room emptied into 2 duffels. The walls, once covered in maps and motivation quotes, stared back bare. On the desk, I left the brass lamp on. I didn't want to be the one to turn out the light. In the days before I left, cadets passed me in the corridors as if I were a warning sign. Some glanced with pity, quick and guilty. Others averted their eyes like disgrace could be contagious. 1 or 2 smirked openly, relieved it wasn't them. Isolation became the uniform I couldn't take off. Back at Fayetteville, my mother avoided my eyes. Caleb was still a teenager, too young to understand, old enough to parrot my father's words. Discipline is destiny. At dinner, my seat was cleared before I sat down. The family portrait above the mantel was replaced with a new one. Caleb taller now, my father's medals brighter, my absence disguised as symmetry. Where I once stood, a vase of white lilies filled the gap. Decoration over daughter. One evening, I lingered at the table too long, hoping for conversation. My father gestured to the porch. "Inside is for honor. The porch is for the rest." The words hardened into architecture. The porch chair became my place. Banished geography, wood pressing into my spine until I memorized the grooves. Exile didn't need bars when silence did the work. Not everyone looked away. Colonel Evelyn Shaw, a visiting instructor from another branch, found me outside the administration building before I left. She didn't ask about discipline or optics. She asked, "Are you okay?" 3 words no one else in authority had offered. She handed me a tissue pack, her thumb running over the folded edges in a rhythm that looked almost like prayer beads. Later, in darker years, I'd mimic that gesture with coins, pins, whatever I had, rosary for the faithless, a rhythm to keep from unraveling. "Sometimes the army eats its young," Shaw said, "but not forever. You've got more in you than this form says." She tapped the withdrawal paper in my hand, then met my eyes. "Don't let them make this your whole story." But it became my scar. Not because of Miller's lies. I could stomach one man's cowardice. but because my father, my own commanding general, chose myth over me. To him, preserving legacy was oxygen. I was a crack in his glass, easier to discard than repair. From then on, I stopped expecting his rescue. I learned that some fathers rescue only themselves. The porch chair creaked each time I sat, wood singing the same refrain, disappointment. I carried it into every room silently, like a watermark only I could see. The years after West Point blurred into survival, shifts at diners, temporary contracts, nights running along back roads to chase the echo of cadence I no longer heard at reveille. I kept moving, but without a banner, without a unit. When Orion Division finally found me, it felt less like recruitment and more like recognition, a hand extended into the void where I had been drifting. Even when I later vanished into shadows, when Orion Division gave me a new pin, a new mission, I still felt the chair beneath me. That was the wound. Not the withdrawal form, not the lies, but the sound of wood beneath silence. A place carved out for me not by strangers, but by blood. And that's why, 8 years later, when an old sergeant straightened his spine and called me General Ward, the sound cracked through me deeper than my father's banishment ever had. Because it wasn't pity, and it wasn't performance. It was recognition of what I had carried, of the scar I never asked for but refused to hide. I didn't disappear the day I left West Point. I learned how to be unseen. The first year after withdrawal felt like walking beside my own life, watching the version that should have been, parades, summer training cycles, late-night briefs, move on without me. I worked diner shifts in towns that smelled like fryer oil and wet asphalt, learned every shade of exhaustion between midnight and dawn, and ran back roads until the breath burned clean again. The porch chair lived in my spine. Even when I was nowhere near Fayetteville, I sat in it. Then the invitation came, not in an envelope, but in a presence. A woman in a simple suit slid onto the counter stool across from me during a dead hour between breakfast and lunch. She ordered coffee black, no sugar. It was the way she watched the room that told me she was there for more than caffeine. Eyes measuring exits, noting angles of cameras, a slight tilt of her head when a truck backfired outside. She let the silence sit until it became a kind of table between us. "You're Taylor Ward," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "You see problems early. Act when it's ugly. Take the heat after." I stood very still with the coffee pot, unsure which part of me she was talking to, the cadet that had ended, or whatever survived. "Who are you?" "Colonel Evelyn Shaw." Her mouth bent, not quite a smile. "We met once." Her thumb rolled the edge of a napkin the same way it had rolled that tissue. A rosary for people who survived without saints. "I have a place where outcomes matter more than optics." "Interested?" I hadn't known you could feel a door open inside your chest. I had thought doors only slammed. She didn't say Orion Division in that diner. She said, "A unit that runs cold and quiet." She said, "Tests you can't put on paper." She said, "You'll never get parade credit, but you'll sleep like you did something that deserved it." I went with her because I had already left the only house that refused me. Ghosting myself into a different one seemed like a smaller step. Orion didn't look like a military showpiece. It looked like a building people forgot to photograph. No signs, no flags, a lobby with a plant that survived on neglect. They took my phone, my name, and the way I thought a career should look. They gave me numbers and doors that opened on codes instead of ceremonies. The first week, they tried to make me quit because Orion never keeps anyone who needs to be convinced. Sleep deprivation, interrogation drills that boiled patience down to bone, movement patterns until my feet found roots my mind didn't have words for. "You act under uncertainty," Shaw told me when she handed back a sanitized ID badge with a picture that looked like I'd been sandblasted. "That's your skill. We'll refine it." We learned to ghost a room, enter and leave with the space forgetting you. We learned to make a face that could be read 100 ways and remembered none. We learned the parts of a lock that surrender if you look at them right. Mostly, we learned to notice the edge of a frame that hangs half a degree lower than it should. The way a story contradicts itself on the third telling. The little laziness where lies live. Orion wasn't a family. Families make demands under the guise of love. Orion offered a ledger. Usefulness in exchange for truth. If you couldn't look data in the eye and accept what it said, you had no business in the unit. Shaw never let me forget the cost of staying. "You'll get no credit in rooms that used to own you," she warned. "Can you live with that?" I surprised us both by saying yes. The first operations were small by the unit standards. Civilian cover in places nobody thought to watch. Sensors tucked in shadows where shadows already pooled. A quiet hand redirecting a shipment that would have broken a city if it arrived intact. The rush in my blood wasn't triumph, it was relief. There are worse fates than living in the dark, if the work you do keeps someone else in the light. But the culvert never left me. Neither did Miller's voice in that debrief, or my father's sentence about discipline. The more precise my work became, the angrier I was at my own record. A single official document that lied louder than anything I could show. I didn't need applause. I needed the truth to be available when someone finally asked for it. So I started collecting what could not be argued. Orion taught me that every system leaks. The winter exercise had left prints across half a dozen servers, range control logs, snowpack sensor data, GPS drift from our training trackers, helmet mic caches that even deleted didn't mean gone. I couldn't access the Academy's servers outright, and I didn't need to. People who didn't know better loved backing up things they weren't authorized to keep. A former instructor kept a personal archive to teach lessons later. A tech contractor carried home whole directories on a mislabeled hard drive. Orion isn't theft. Orion is regret, reassembled into truth. I built a ledger from scraps. I mapped the exact minute the culvert failed against the last "proceed as ordered" in Miller's voice. I aligned the spike in the snowpack sensors with the shift in our GPS tracks when I veered us left. I found the recording of my voice, calm, urgent, ordering the lateral move, and Miller's voice calling me down 15 seconds before the collapse. The pattern was so clean it felt like a law of physics. If evidence were enough, the story would have ended there. But I understood the second law of families. Lies calcify stronger than proof, until the right person demands the right page at the right time. That person wasn't me. It was never going to be me. The more I pressed, the easier it would be to paint me as the disgraced daughter hell-bent on revenge. I needed the truth to arrive from inside the house. Caleb was the reason I didn't burn the place down. He kept inviting me to his life. Texts that said, "come by," instead of "come back." A restraint that never turned into indifference. He listened to my silences the way most people listen to speeches. He had grown into a man who could be both our father's son and still his own, and I did not want to make him choose. I made him a notebook for his graduation. Leather cover, thick paper, heavy enough to feel like purpose when you held it. On the inside backboard, under the binding, I epoxied a microdisc. Nothing marked on the label, nothing to give away the weight it carried. On that disc, I mirrored my ledger. Data logs, audio, metadata screenshots, a written index keyed to dates I knew he would remember if he ever needed to. I told myself it was insurance. The truth is, I told myself a lot of things. Mostly, I was creating a future in which Caleb could pull a thread and watch a tapestry choke on its own beauty. I didn't tell him it was there. Leverage only works when it belongs to the person who doesn't know they're carrying it. He shelved the notebook in his study between books with spines he loved for content and books he loved for how they looked. I let it sit there and tried to sleep. Orion didn't pause for my private war. Missions kept arriving in Manila that never touched sunlight. I learned to slide a truth into place with a touch so soft the world didn't notice the outcome had improved. In Tehran, I slipped a drive across a table to someone who didn't blink when the news from the north arrived late. In Tallinn, I watched a man choose his child over his handler and decide it was his idea. In D.C., I walked past my father in a corridor I had a badge for, and he did not recognize me because he had never learned to see anything except what he wanted. Then Hale re-entered my orbit. By accident, I told myself. And then later, I understood there are fewer accidents than there are patterns we don't see soon enough. Caleb's promotion party brought out every ghost with a tie in Fayetteville. And Hale came, because old sergeants know that even myths need witnesses. I watched him clock the porch, the banishment, the chair. I watched him study me the way only NCOs study a soldier, not by rank, but by whether the ground moves when she steps. He saluted me because he recognized command in exile. But he also knew something I didn't. What Richard sounded like when he wasn't being recorded. Over bourbon, he told stories that made senators laugh because they thought they were about glory. Meanwhile, I heard what lay under them, an intolerance for anything that did not decorate his narrative. It was a relief and a weapon to hear that from someone who had been there. Hale became a bridge, though not of my making. He started visiting the house more often, an old soldier drifting through rooms that had erased me from the walls. He asked Caleb questions our father never did. "What do you actually want?" he said once, as if asking a forbidden thing. Caleb didn't answer then. He answered later. I had been tracing another pattern while watching these smaller ones. There was a channel, informal, unlogged, between Miller and my father after the exercise. I couldn't capture content, but I could capture fact. A series of off-network pings that coincided neatly with the drafting of the AAR and the scheduling of my withdrawal. It was geometry, not gossip. A triangle whose sides only made sense if you accepted the dishonor of the angle. I put those timestamps into the ledger, not because a panel would care about pings, but because a good lawyer would. I was building a case not for court, but for whatever the closest thing to court would be when the time came. Orion taught me to plan for a venue you might never see. The practice keeps you honest. The moment that moved this from insurance to inevitability did not arrive with sirens. It arrived with a text from Caleb one afternoon that read simply, "Was this meant for me?" and a photo of the leather notebook's backboard pried open, the edge of epoxy like a healed wound. I stared at the screen in a safe room with no windows and felt my pulse beat a message into my wrist. "If you found it, I typed. Read the index. Don't show anyone. Not yet. Call Shaw's office. Ask for the FSRB liaison. He didn't ask how I knew which liaison. He trusted the version of me that had planned 3 moves ahead for 8 years. The Federal Security Review Board was the kind of panel most citizens never hear about. Interagency. Quiet. The place where reputations go to meet facts. It wasn't a courtroom. It was better. It had transcripts, witnesses, data, and no patience for myth. I had kept my mouth closed because every word out of mine could be painted as filial treason. But if a ward son delivered a disc to an FSRB liaison and asked for a hearing, the story moved from family to federal, which is where it belonged all along. Caleb didn't tell me when he made the appointment. He told me after it was done. Hearing scheduled, he texted. Private skiff. They want you in the room. I sat in Orion's windowless briefing cubicle and let the air out of my chest. Not relief. Alignment. Shaw called me in that evening, handed me tea like we were human instead of tools. You understand what this will cost him, she said. And you. I do, I said. I understand what it has already cost. She rolled the rim of the teacup under her thumb, the old gesture that could have been prayer or counting. Bring only what is clean, she said. Let the lies sink themselves. My father learned about the hearing from his lawyer, not from me. I imagine he stood very still, the way men do when they think stillness equals control. He called Caleb. Caleb didn't pick up. He called me. I didn't answer. He called Hale. Hale said, Sir, there's a point where legacy is just another word for a cover story. You taught me to keep the record straight. It wasn't insubordination. It was the kind of loyalty the Army pretends it wants and rarely rewards. The night before the hearing, I took the porch chair out of my head and placed it, in memory, in the garage. That won't mean anything to anyone who has never lived under a roof that called exile discipline. It meant everything to me. I lay awake anyway, listening to the echo of boots in my mind, and Miller's flat voice reading the AAR, and my father's sentence about discipline. I did not pray. I did not ask for mercy. I rehearsed the facts the way Orion taught me to rehearse movement, until I could walk them with my eyes closed. The skiff sat beneath a federal building that looked ordinary on purpose. Underground, the air was the same wherever you went, conditioned, humming. Air without weather. The guards at the door looked at my badge and saw a category they didn't say out loud. The room itself was clean and small. A table, a recorder, chairs that cared less about comfort than posture. The panel wore expressions like neutral masks. A court reporter's fingers hovered above a machine that would make everything official. My father entered in a suit that had outlived its bravery. Miller arrived behind counsel, eyes jumpy above a tie he'd picked for what it said about him rather than what it said about facts. Caleb came in last, steady in a way I had never seen him in our father's house. Hale took a chair along the wall, not at the table. Shaw sat behind me, not touching, present like gravity. No one saluted. That would come later. I placed the drive on the table and slid the printed index across to the clerk. These are time-synced data logs, audio, and corroborating metadata collected from systems affiliated with the United States Military Academy and associated training ranges, I said. It sounded rehearsed, because it was. You rehearse what matters, so your body doesn't abandon you when the room does. The panel chair nodded. We will admit the materials pending verification. Her voice carried the particular quiet of people who spend their days choosing between versions of reality. We're here to resolve a discrepancy between an AAR and subsequent claims. Speak plainly. I thought of the culvert, the sound of snow failing, the beat between my order and the collapse. I thought of a porch, a chair, a sentence that had been used as a gavel. Then I spoke, calm, ordinary, the way you tell someone a route you've walked 100 times. Lieutenant Miller's order would have put cadets into a compromised culvert. I gave a corrective command. The evidence will show it. The AAR inverted events to protect optics. My father endorsed that inversion. Shaw's thumb rested on the paper edge. Caleb's jaw moved once and stilled. My father already had his reply loaded. The Army runs on discipline. He said it like a man citing scripture he no longer felt. The chair wrote the words down anyway. The most honest thing in the room was the drive. I had built it for a day like this, without knowing when the day would come. It looked like a simple device. It was, in fact, a door. That was the catalyst. Not the invitation to Orion, not the ledger built in dark rooms, not even the saluted name on a porch. It was the moment a story moved from a house that liked its myths framed to a room where data speaks, and men learn how small their legends are. When the panel began playback, I sat very still and let the records do what I had been training them to do for years. I didn't look at my father. I looked at the timestamp blinking in the corner of the screen, while a voice that had tried to ruin me ruined itself instead. I had told myself 1,000 versions of how this would feel. None of them were true. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the first breath after you realize the water you have been standing in is finally gone. And somewhere behind me, faint as a memory, I could feel the porch chair shifting, wood resettling, no longer required to hold the weight it had carried for so long. The plan wasn't revenge. Revenge burns fast and blinds you. What I needed was daylight, the kind that doesn't flare, the kind that stays. Orion had a term for it: clean chain. Evidence that could walk on its own legs from origin to verdict, leaving footprints anyone could measure. No theatrics, no shortcuts, no cleverness that would rot under cross-examination. If I wanted the culvert to collapse where it should, on the lie, not on me, my plan had to be built like a bridge you'd trust with a convoy. I started with the ledger I'd already assembled and stripped it of anything that smelled like me. Screenshots with my desktop clock? Gone. Explanatory notes in my voice? Rewritten into plain description. Every file was renamed for content, not interpretation. Range Snowpack UTC 2017-02-11.CSV. Audio Helmet 1 2017-02-11_1423 Z.WAV. GPS_Delta_PLT3_1420-14330Z.KML. If the drive were discovered in a desert a decade from now, I wanted it to say what happened without me in the room to defend it. Shaw reviewed the directory tree without comment, only tracing a line down the page with her thumb. "Better," she said. "Now who carries it?" "Not me," I answered, "and not you." She nodded once. "Good." Caleb had already found the hidden disk. He had already asked for the hearing. The chain needed to run through him now, not around him. Wardson brings the materials. Clerk logs them. Panel acknowledges receipt. Verification begins. Textbooks call it procedure. I called it escape velocity, the point where the truth no longer needed my push. To brace the chain, I added witness anchors. Hale agreed to authenticate voices. He had spent decades reading the weather in an officer's tone. His statement could say what a waveform couldn't. That's the general. That's Miller. He kept it short. Old NCOs know the power of a single sentence on the record. Shaw refused to be a star witness. I'm here to hold your spine, not your microphone. But she drafted a technical memo about winter training conditions, culvert failure patterns, and risk thresholds for cadets in full kit. No adjectives, diagrams, citations. It read like a white paper that had accidentally wandered into a hearing, which was exactly what I wanted. Expertise that didn't care who won. The FSRB skiff was public only to the extent that the state can be public without being seen. That suited me. A courtroom invites performance. A skiff insists on record. I phoned the liaison from a line Orion would bless and asked practical questions that sounded like logistics and were, in fact, strategy. Will there be a court reporter? Yes. Will the transcript be retained and reviewable under standard request? Yes, within classification bounds. Will exhibits be time-synced in the record, not summarized? A pause, then, yes. That was my cue to breathe. Transcripts make legacies honest eventually. People forget their own lies. Paper doesn't. I requested one more detail, phrased as courtesy. Please ensure participants are seated by role, not by rank. The liaison didn't ask why. In a room like that, rank is gravity. I needed function to be the floor. Panel, counsel, witness, full stop. If my father wanted his medals to answer for him, he could pin them to the table. The most dangerous part of the plan wasn't the evidence. It was me. If I entered the skiff as a daughter, I would lose. If I entered it as a ghost with a ledger, I had a chance. So I wrote rules for my own posture, the way I once wrote op orders. Rule 1. Speak once. Let the record carry the rest. Rule 2. No adjectives about character. Only actions, times, decisions. Rule 3. If asked about motive, answer with outcome. Rule 4. When in doubt, breathe and point to the page. Shaw drilled me like a recruit. What do you do if counsel baits you with family? Define the term, I said. Family is who gets you home alive. What do you do if your father cites discipline? Agree. Then show the discipline of moving left when a culvert will kill you. She let the silence hang until it felt like weight training for the mind. Again. At night, I ran, same loop, same mile markers, until the roar in my head turned into a metronome. I stopped practicing speeches. I practiced pauses. In Orion, we learned that the space between two statements can do more work than a paragraph. I wasn't there to win the room. I was there to let the room meet the truth and recognize itself. The disk in Caleb's notebook had been my lever. The hearing was the fulcrum. I needed triggers, moments that would push the panel toward the data instead of the narrative my father and Miller would surely perform. Trigger 1 was snow science. Most people think snow fails like glass, dramatic and visible. Engineers know it fails like a liar, quietly, then all at once. I flagged the exact chart where the water level under the culvert had risen beyond safe tolerance. The dashed red line would do more to indict Miller than any sentence I could say. Trigger 2 was timing. I prepped a side-by-side, the timestamp of my left flank 30 meters and the collapse 20 seconds later. It isn't insubordination when physics agrees with you. Trigger 3 was off-network pings. Not content, nothing illegal, just the pattern of who called whom between debrief and draft. I labeled it Geometry of a Cover Story in my private notes, and Communication Sequence 3 in the exhibit list. Trigger 4 was voice authentication. Hale didn't need a lab. He needed a sentence. That's the general, and a reason. I stood 3 feet off his left shoulder for 15 years. He drops his R when he's lying. It wasn't poetry. It was a map. I never said the word trap to Caleb, but we both understood one would spring if my father chose legacy over record again. The plan allowed him a clean exit he would not take. He could admit he had endorsed a flawed AAR for optics and claim he'd do differently with better data. A certain kind of man cannot imagine himself choosing wrongly, even in theory. All I had to do was make the theory visible and let him collide with it. So I wrote a single question in my notebook and circled it. General Ward, if the evidence shows the culvert was compromised, do you stand by a report that would have put cadets through it? Any answer but no would answer everything. Hale asked me what I needed from him on the morning of the hearing. He had put on a suit that fit well enough, but sat on him like borrowed armor. Just what you saw and what you heard, I said. He nodded. And what I didn't see, he added, which was a chain of command protecting the living over the story. You can say that? I asked. I can say what I know, he paused at the door. And I can salute who deserves it. He had already done that once. He would do it again in a room that would remember. Caleb required less scripting than I feared. He had read the ledger doubt by doubt until doubt had nowhere left to stand. I won't grandstand, he promised. I'll deliver. He was steady in a way our family had never taught him to be. Maybe that was the point. The night before, I laid out the objects that had organized my life without my permission. The withdrawal form, copy. The silver unit pin. The small pack of tissues I kept out of habit more than need. I held each until it lost the power to pull me out of myself. The porch chair lived in memory only. I imagined carrying it into the garage, placing it beside boxes labeled Christmas lights and things we don't need but keep anyway, then closing the door. You can't bring a seat of exile into a room built for record. It will beg you to sit. I slept hard for 3 hours. That was enough. The skiff had the same smell as every room where the government measures its conscience. Recycled air, paper, a faint electric tang from machines that never fully rest. The panel filed in with files. Counsel carried legal pads like shields. The court reporter tested her keys, the staccato of future memory. We took our places by function. It helped. My father had to leave his rank outside like a coat. Miller sat a half step behind his attorney, eyes small. Shaw took a seat behind me again, posture relaxed, hands still. Hale sat in the witness row where men like him disappear until they speak. I put the drive down and slid the index forward. My hands didn't shake. I had trained them not to. Ms. Ward, the chair said, we will begin with the sequence you provided. Yes, ma'am. Do you assert this to be a complete and unaltered record as to the events on the date in question? I assert that it is what the systems recorded. She looked up, satisfied. Words matter. So do limits. I let counsel for the panel lead first. He asked for the snowpack chart. I had placed it first for a reason. Science has no interest in our name. When the red tolerance line met the blue rise, even the air changed. Then the audio. Miller's order, my countermand, the collapse. The AAR read behind it like a parody. When my father's counsel attempted the oldest trick, Isn't it true you held a grudge against your father that might color your interpretation? I pointed to the index. These are timestamps and waveforms, I said. They do not know my name. Miller tried another tactic. We were training for combat conditions, where hesitation kills. I didn't look at him. Correct, I said. And so does water at 33 degrees when you march cadets into it. Hale did his part clean. That is General Ward's voice, he said, when played the corridor audio from the hours between the debrief and the draft. He drops the R in ordered when he's framing rather than reporting. The panel looked amused until they realized men who live by cadence here tells the rest of us don't. Shaw's memo slid across the table like a map of a country we had all lived in the night of the exercise, but only some of us had learned to name. The chair asked 2 technical questions. Shaw answered them in 9 words each. I could feel the plan doing the work it was built to do. Make a choice unavoidable. My father had to either affirm the record or deny physics. Miller had to either own his order or blame the cadet who saved his squad. Caleb had to either stand down or stand up. We had reached the question I had circled. General Ward, the chair said, turning. If the evidence shows the culvert was compromised, do you stand by the report that would have routed cadets across it? The room tightened. A collective breath held at parade rest. My father looked not at the screens but at me, as if I were the only audience worth winning. The Army runs on discipline, he began. The chair cut in gently. Yes, General. On discipline and on facts. Do you stand by the report? He could have said no. He could have saved himself with a single surrender to reality. The plan allowed him that exit. He watched it pass. I stand by the report, he said. There it was. Not a trap sprung, no one had forced him, but a man stepping of his own will into the place the data had marked. From there, the plan went to contingencies we had written but hoped not to use. Caleb slid his statement forward, short, hand-signed, delivered without drama. I provided the materials, he said. I request that the board prioritize the safety record of cadets over the reputation of any individual, including my father. He didn't look at Richard. He looked at the chair. Generations shifted in that small act. Counsel for the panel requested a technical hold on the AAR pending verification. That gave the truth time to breathe without being shouted down. I had built us that window. Caleb had opened it. I said very little else. The plan was never to make a speech. It was to hold a door until the record could walk through. As we adjourned for the day, Shaw leaned close enough that only I could hear. Last rule, she said. When a myth falls, it tries to take you with it. Don't lean, I won't, I said, and felt it, how the porch in my head had been replaced by something with footing. We filed out into a corridor with no windows. Hale's shoes clicked a soldier's rhythm on tile. My father's counsel murmured in a tone lawyers use when they know their client has just chosen the losing hill. Miller's tie hung a fraction lower. I didn't touch the silver pin in my pocket. I didn't need its edges to remind me who I was aiming to be. The plan had done what it was built to do. Make truth the only option that didn't require a lie to prop it up. Tomorrow would be the confrontation everyone thinks they come to hearings for. The moment where the myth pretends it still has the room. But I knew the important part had already happened. The bridge held. The convoy could cross. The skiff had no windows, but the room knew what kind of day it was. You could hear it in the air handlers, steady as a heart you trust. The panel took their seats, counsel uncapped pens. The court reporter's fingers hovered. I placed the drive on the table and felt the cool edge of the Orion pin in my pocket. Shaw sat behind me, a fixed star you navigate by. Caleb was 3 chairs to my left, shoulders squared, gaze level. My father sat opposite the panel, suit perfect, chin lifted, the portrait pose stripped of its frame. Miller leaned an inch behind his attorney, already smaller than his rank. "Record is live," the reporter said, keys barely whispering. The chair, a woman with a calm that made other people confess weather, nodded to the exhibits cart. "Proceed with sequence A." The screen came alive with the snowpack chart. No story, no music, just a line rising beneath a dashed red tolerance. The training culvert sensor, underground, indifferent, showed the river swelling under the crust. You could feel the room aligned to science the way a squad aligns to cadence. "Sequence A establishes environmental risk," panel counsel said. "Sequence B, audio." Helmet audio loaded. Static breath. The squeak of cold straps. Then Miller's voice clipped. "Proceed as ordered." 15 seconds. My voice, calm and too loud in my own bones even now. "Left flank, 30 meters, move." Crunch of boots. 8 seconds. Then the culvert failed, a hollow roar you felt before you understood it. Someone cursed, someone laughed the way people laugh after they don't die. The waveform spiked, the timestamp blinked. "Sequence C, GPS Delta," counsel said. Colored lines tracked across a digital map, the platoon veering left when I called it, the collapse marker hitting right where we would have been. The math did not care whose daughter I was. My father's counsel tried to step in before the next clip. "We don't deny weather," he said, "but doctrine." "We'll come to doctrine," the chair said. "Sequence D." Sequence D was the AAR, Miller's report, scanned, stamped, authenticated, projected tall enough to read from anywhere in the room. He had written reckless deviation, loss of cohesion, endangerment. The words looked ridiculous next to the audio waveform and GPS, but lies always look comfortable until you stand them beside physics. "Ms. Ward," panel counsel said to me, "do you claim authorship of any of these records?" "No," I said. "I claim they exist." "Good," the chair said. "General Ward, Lieutenant Miller, you will have your say. But we will finish the material first." They ran sequence E, a communication log, not content, only metadata. Time-stamped pings between Miller's personal device and a number registered to a staff office where my father had privileges, in the window between debrief and report draft. The room didn't gasp. It just wrote. "We'll authenticate voices next," the chair said. "Mr. Hale?" Hale stood from the witness row and came forward with the care of a man who never wasted motion. He didn't look at me, and I loved him for that. The clerk swore him in. He rested his hands on the table like it was a rail he had leaned on 1,000 nights. "You served under General Ward?" panel counsel asked. 15 years, Hale said. XO to his command teams. I was within 3 feet of him more hours than any man alive. "We'll play 2 clips from corridor mics recorded between debrief and draft," counsel said. "Please state whether the voices are known to you." They played a short slice, murmurs, footsteps, doors, the hush of walls that had seen too much. Then my father's low baritone. "We'll hold the line on discipline." "Clean it up." Another male voice, Miller. "Understood, sir." Not a crime in itself. Ethics rarely leaves its fingerprints. but the room needed an ear that remembered. "That's General Ward," Hale said. "He drops his R in ordered when he's shaping a story. He doesn't when he's reporting one. That other voice is Lieutenant Miller. How certain are you?" "As certain as I am about my own name," Hale said. No flourish, just a sentence that would stand when the rest of us were gone. Miller's counsel objected to the linguistic speculation. The chair sustained in tone only, not in substance. "We will treat it as lay familiarity," she said, "which in this context has weight." Shaw's memo slid across next. A 2-page white paper with diagrams of culvert stress under thaw-flood conditions, training risk thresholds, and the doctrine that safety of personnel supersedes schedule adherence in field exercises. She had cited the page numbers like it was a library and brought the library with her. The panel took it like water. "Lieutenant Miller," panel counsel said, turning, "you may respond to sequence A through E." Miller cleared his throat. His attorney nodded. He stepped into the line like a man accustomed to briefings where tone wins. "In training, hesitation kills." We were on a timetable. Cadet Ward undermined cohesion. My report reflected the primary violation: insubordination under directive. "Did you know the culvert's sensor had spiked above tolerance?" "Sensor data is advisory," he said. "Our doctrine, which doctrine supersedes an imminent environmental hazard?" counsel asked. Miller faltered. "The risk assessment is the officer's judgment, and my judgment was..." "Wrong," I said, before I could help it. Shaw's fingers didn't touch me, but I felt the memory of her touch like a sternness on my shoulder. I swallowed the rest and looked at the chair. "Apologies. The evidence shows it was wrong." "Apology accepted," the chair said. Then to Miller, "You may sit." "General Ward," panel counsel said, "you endorsed this AAR?" "I endorsed discipline," my father said, smooth. "The academy cannot function if cadets freelance execution." "Even to avert a hazard?" counsel asked. "Even when sensor data..." "The Army runs on discipline," he repeated, eyes on me, not on the question. It had always been his scripture when facts were inconvenient. The chair paused, let the air settle, then turned the question I had circled for months into the instrument I had built it to be. "General, if the evidence shows the culvert was compromised at the time of the order, do you stand by the report that would have sent cadets across it?" He could have said no. He could have saved himself with the simplest kind of courage, the kind that comes after the fact. "I stand by the report," he said. The room wrote the sentence down. Some sentences you don't have to fight. You just have to let them live where everyone can see them. Caleb slid a paper forward. His statement, short as a breath. "I provided the materials," he said for the record. "I request the board prioritize cadet safety over reputation, including my father's." He didn't look at Richard. He looked at the chair. A generation moved in the space his eyes traveled. "Ms. Ward," panel counsel said, "one question. Why didn't you bring this earlier?" "Because my voice would have been read as a daughter's grievance," I said. "The evidence needed to arrive without me attached, so it could live longer than our family story." No one objected. The court reporter typed. The plan walked on its own legs. Miller's attorney tried one last swing. "Isn't it true Cadet Ward had a history of questioning orders?" And I let the reporter finish the question before I answered. "Yes," I said. "Once, when an order would have put my squad in water 33 degrees cold." You can call it questioning. The culvert calls it survival. The panel recessed for 15 minutes. No one stood. In rooms like this, people drift to neutral corners to pretend they have somewhere else to be. I stared at a point an inch above the exhibits cart and breathed the 4 count. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold, until it synced with the hum of the air. When the chair returned, she spoke as if she were reading a weather report already measured by instruments. The board finds prima facie conflict between the AAR and the objective record. We will provisionally suspend reliance on the AAR in any personnel action taken against Ms. Ward, pending full verification. We will refer potential falsification to the appropriate inspector channels. Lieutenant Miller, you will surrender any personal devices used during the period in question for forensic review. Miller went pale at the last clause. His attorney squeezed his arm in a way that said, "Don't faint on paper." My father's jaw did not move, which told me he wanted to grind his teeth and remembered this room kept minutes. Before we adjourn for the day, the chair added, the board will permit brief statements for the transcript from the parties on the understanding that facts, not feelings, will govern the remainder of this process. My father stood. He didn't glance at me, which meant he was speaking to me. Discipline is not a feeling, he said. It is the skeleton of a fighting force. If we excuse insubordination because outcomes happen to favor it, we rot the bone from within. I will not endorse rot. There it was, his gospel, polished to a shine that made people forget what it reflected. The reporter typed it, even the part he thought was too noble to be questioned. Ms. Ward? The chair asked. I stood. Discipline saved us, I said. The discipline to act when censors say ICE will fail. The discipline to accept what the record shows after. The discipline to correct a report that lies. I do not accept rot either. I sat. Mr. Hale, panel counsel said unexpectedly. We will allow the witness one statement to contextualize the record. Hale rose. He didn't go to the table. He faced the panel from where he'd stood all those years, 3 feet off his officer's left shoulder, the place where truth often has to live. He smoothed the front of his suit, squared his stance, and in the most untheatrical motion of the day, lifted his right hand. It was not for my father. Hale's salute came to me across the skiff like a bridge only he knew how to build. Ramrod straight, regulation clean, nothing sentimental in it. He held it for the precise second the manual prescribes, then dropped it. My general, he said for the record, is the one who saves lives. The court reporter looked up as if she'd felt something shift, and then looked back down and caught it on paper. The sentence settled into the transcript like a stone in a river you will have to walk past for the rest of your life. My father made a sound then, not a word, something between breath and denial. He caught it before it left him and turned it into stillness. A lifetime of ceremonies trained him for this. But ceremonies don't help when the room is measuring facts. Caleb stood without being asked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He sounded like a man reading instructions you follow if you don't want to break what comes next. You chose legacy over lives, he said. You taught me discipline means telling the truth even when it hurts. I'm choosing your lesson. I just wish you would too. Silence took the room, not the empty kind, the full kind that follows something honest. We'll reconvene at 0900, the chair said. Exhibits are locked. Parties are admonished not to contact potential witnesses. We filed out by function again. In the corridor, the air felt cooler, which meant nothing because underground air is always the same. Shaw touched the edge of my sleeve. One tap. Don't lean. I didn't. My father stayed behind with his counsel. Miller stared at the floor pattern as if a way out might be tiled there. Hale waited for me at the end of the hall, not in the posture of a man who needed thanks, but in the posture of a man for whom duty had simply found a new direction. You good? He asked. I will be, I said. He nodded once, economical. Tomorrow they'll try to talk loud again. Then we'll turn up the record, I said. Caleb came up beside us. His hand didn't shake when he put it on my shoulder. We keep going, he said. We did. The second day opened with procedures that always feel like the point until you remember their scaffolding. Authentication of hashes, chain of custody stipulations, a stipulation that the Academy's systems would mirror our copies for verification. My father's counsel tried to narrow the scope to cadet conduct. The chair widened it by quoting doctrine about officer judgment under risk. Miller's attorney floated the word context so often it lost meaning. Sequence F, the chair said at last. Helmet Audio Channel 2, enhanced. This was the piece even I hadn't heard clean until Orion's lab put their hands on it. In the seconds before my call left my mouth, you could hear the subtle hollow under the crust, the way thawed water talks through snow if you've learned to listen. It was faint. It was indisputable. The engineer from the lab, faceless behind a voice mask for classification, testified to the enhancement process. Then the board's own technician ran it again on government software until even the lawyers stopped pretending they heard nothing. My father leaned forward, elbows almost on the table, something I had never seen him do in uniform or out. There were also 26 successful evolutions that winter, he said, as if averages could absolve a single incident. We cannot recalibrate every training cycle to the slowest heartbeat in the room. The chair didn't blink. We are not discussing performance statistics, General. We are discussing an event where the record indicates a hazard existed and a corrective order prevented harm. This goes to the accuracy of an official report. His jaw worked. He likely thought the muscles made him look strong. To me, they looked like a man chewing a sentence he did not want to swallow. Lieutenant Miller, panel counsel said, given the risk indicated by sequences A, B, and F, do you still characterize Cadet Ward's order as reckless? Miller glanced at my father. A lifetime of looking left for approval had left a mark. I would characterize it as unauthorized, he said. That wasn't the question, counsel replied. Miller opened his mouth and found no clean way through. Then I amend, he said at last, voice dull. It was corrective. The word landed. You could feel it, like a gear catching. Corrective. The opposite of reckless. A correction the report had punished, and my father had blessed. Caleb didn't move. He didn't need to. The panel wrote it down. On the basis of the foregoing, the chair said, the board will move to findings. And there, the moment you think you came for, arrived without trumpet or camera. The chair read the sentence that repaired the line my father's pen had cut years before. We find the AAR materially inaccurate as to the sequence and characterization of Cadet Ward's actions. We find that Cadet Ward issued a corrective order consistent with safety and risk doctrine. We recommend rescission of any adverse academic or conduct action predicated on the AAR and refer the matter of potential falsification and undue command influence for investigation. The words were plain. They were everything. My father didn't stand. For a second, I wished he would. Then I recognized the old temptation to look for some version of victory that included him and let it pass. For the transcript, the chair added, Mr. Hale's identification of voices is admitted as lay familiarity. Colonel Shaw's memorandum is admitted as expert technical advisory. The helmet audio and sensor logs are admitted as authentic, subject to standard verification completed in session. The court reporter read back the key lines for clarity, her machine turning breath into a spine. Any further statements? The chair asked. I stood. Just one, I said. The porch is not for disappointments. It's for sunrise. I would like the record to show I'm stepping off it. A tiny breach of style. The chair allowed it. Noted, she said. Hale didn't salute this time. He didn't need to. The transcript had. We filed out. The corridor was the same, but something in my gait wasn't. Even underground, I felt light change. The corridor outside the skiff was narrow, lit by fluorescence that flattened everything into equal shade. Yet the air felt wider than it had in years. Caleb walked at my side, not behind me, not across from me. Hale kept his steady 3-foot offset, the habit of a lifetime. Shaw was a step back, letting me carry my own center but ready if I faltered. My father lingered inside with counsel. I could picture him. Suit still perfect, hands clasped as if control could be summoned by posture. But the transcript didn't care about posture. It cared about timestamps, waveforms, and the word corrective. Outside the building, press had gathered in the cautious way press does when rumor has outpaced protocol. They weren't supposed to know the hearing existed, yet somehow they did. A microphone shoved toward me like a bayonet. Ms. Ward, General Ward, what happens now? I looked at Caleb. He nodded once. His turn. My sister's record has been restored, he said. His voice didn't crack. The Academy has acknowledged error. The truth is what matters now, not legacy. That's all we'll say. The cameras clicked, the way they click when a family line shifts in public. My father had trained Caleb to speak in front of people, but not like this, not with calm that didn't defer upward. A reporter pressed, Do you disavow your father's version? Caleb didn't flinch. I affirm the record. That's what matters. It was the cleanest sentence I'd ever heard him say. It belonged in the transcript, even if it never made it there. Hale stood a step off, watching the crowd, protective without declaring it. Someone asked him for comment. He shook his head. Then, after a pause, he said just loud enough, I served with General Richard Ward. Today I served with General Taylor Ward. The words traveled faster than he meant them to. The microphones drank them, and even if the official record never noted them, the unofficial one did. We turned away before the questions doubled. Shaw herded us with a glance that meant, no more words, let the record breathe. Back in the waiting car, silence wrapped us. Caleb loosened his tie, the first time I'd seen him do it before sundown. You built this, he said. We built it, I corrected. He smiled, but his eyes were wet. That night, the board's findings moved faster than I expected. A preliminary cable went to the Academy instructing the registrar to rescind my withdrawal form and reclassify my status as honorable separation. Another cable went to the Office of Military Review, flagging Miller for potential UCMJ referral. Article 107, False Official Statements. And one more cable, heavier than the rest, went to the Inspector General. Allegation of undue influence by General Richard Ward, retired. I read the text twice. I didn't feel triumph. I felt weight, leaving a body I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The next morning, before we returned for administrative wrap-up, my father intercepted me in the lobby. No cameras this time, just us. "You've destroyed everything I built," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. The kind that cracks if it rises. I held his eyes. "No, you built a house of mirrors." I turned on the lights. "You think you've won?" His jaw flexed. "You think truth keeps a legacy warm at night?" "I don't need it warm," I said. "I need it honest." For a flicker, less than a second, I saw him want to say something else. Maybe apology. Maybe love. But myths don't speak those words without collapsing. He swallowed them and turned away. Caleb stepped out from the elevator alcove. He had heard every syllable. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm done choosing between you and the truth." Richard Ward looked at him, the son who had been his shadow. He didn't answer. He walked out the door and into whatever silence men like him create when their legends break. Inside, the board convened only long enough to log the final motions. Referral of Miller, referral of Richard Ward, confirmation of my restored record. The chair closed the file. "This matter is provisionally concluded," she said. "Ms. Ward, you are free to go." Free. 2 syllables heavier than any rank. I left the skiff without looking back. Caleb matched me step for step. Hale followed, then Shaw. At the curb, the air was sharp with winter. I drew one breath, deep enough to feel the edges of my lungs. It wasn't victory. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something steadier. The sound of wood no longer creaking under me. The porch had lost me. The record had kept me. And tomorrow, there would still be work to do. A courier left a flat envelope at my door. Government cream, weighty enough to be felt through gloves. Inside, on Academy letterhead, a registrar's stamp walked back 8 winters like they were steps on a parade ground. Withdrawal, rescinded. Status, honorable separation. Annotation, corrective action under adverse conditions, consistent with safety doctrine. There was no flourish. Bureaucracy seldom offers one. But the line that mattered most was the one that took nothing from me and gave me back a room inside my own name. I read it once standing, once sitting, and once with my forehead against the cool edge of the table, breathing like I had been underwater a long time. The second thing that changed was silence. Not absence, refusal. Reporters called. Old classmates texted cautiously, hovering between apology and self-protection. I answered almost no one. The record had spoken. Anything I said would only dress the truth in adjectives it didn't need. Miller's notice came through counsel. Article 107 referral. He released a sentence about context and stress that sounded like a man trying to sell fog. The board didn't buy it. Process would take months, process always does. But for once, the delay served the right side of gravity. My father's letter was shorter. "I will contest." 3 words, immaculate pen. Not "I will correct," not "I am sorry." He addressed it to the board, not to me. It should have hurt. It didn't. Pain needs expectation to feed on. I had none left. Caleb and I met Shaw and Hale at a diner 2 blocks from the Federal Building where the skiff lived under concrete. No back room, no ceremony. Hale set a folded index card by my coffee like it was a field order. "My general is the one who saves lives. Master Sergeant H." I wrote it out so I couldn't be misquoted, he said, eyes on his cup. Men like your father quote silence. I slid the card into my wallet behind the new letter from the academy. 2 truths, the kind that don't argue. Shaw tore a paper napkin into neat strips without looking down, her thumb running each edge like a rosary for the faithless. You did the hard thing, she said. Now do the harder one. What's harder? Don't let this become your personality, she said gently. Let it be your record. Then live I laughed once, brief and surprised, because she had located the trap before I could build it. A life organized around a wound, even after the wound closes. I tucked the napkin strips into a stack and felt their lightness. We drove to Fayetteville a week later because some rooms need to see you standing in them before they believe the transcript exists. The house looked the same, brick sure of itself, porch painted the color of caution, portrait over the mantel pretending to be a mirror. Mother met us at the door with careful smile and careful perfume. She wasn't cruelties, she was complicity rendered as housekeeping. I heard, she said, about the paperwork. Records, I said, because words matter. Yes. She glanced toward the study where my father kept the books he thought made him look thoughtful. He's away. Of course he was. My father had always been excellent at logistics that moved his body out of the room before consequence arrived. I didn't ask where. Caleb moved past us into the hall, looked up at the portrait, stood still. The old picture had been replaced since my last visit. Same arrangement, father center, mother anchored by pearls, Caleb to his right. And where a daughter might have been, there was a vase again. Hydrangeas looking like apology with a florist's invoice. I'm taking it down, Caleb said. Mother made a small sound in her throat, an animal catching itself in a trap and deciding to wait. We could move it to the study. No, he said, and took it off the hook with both hands, the way you lift a weight that wants to break something on the way down. He set it on the floor, leaned it against the wall, and didn't kick it. That restraint felt like a new kind of inheritance. In its place, he hung nothing. Blank plaster. Space that didn't need to be filled, to be honest. We went to the porch. The chair creaked exactly where it always had, offering me the old geography. I stood in front of it and didn't sit. The porch is for sunrise, I said. Caleb smiled, tired and true. Then watch this. We carried the chair to the garage together. 2 steps, pause, 2 steps. The way you carry a friend who's drunk on history. We set it beside a box labeled seasonal lights and another labeled things we keep anyway. The smell of oil and cedar settled around us. I closed the garage door with the button my father had installed to avoid getting out in the rain. Inside, Mother was at the sink, rinsing a glass that didn't need rinsing. She turned, the careful smile back on like a uniform that doesn't fit. Will you stay for dinner? I can't, I said. Not tonight. She nodded, eyes searching the floorboards for a script that might put us back into a play where no one bleeds. He loved you, she said too quickly and winced at the past tense, as if she had been caught using an illegal word. I know, I said, and surprised us both by meaning it. Love wasn't always kindness, and sometimes it was the opposite. But the feeling had been there once before it hardened into myth. It isn't the same thing as telling the truth. She looked at Caleb, maybe to salvage him. He didn't move. Mom, he said softly, we're okay. We left the house without closing the door to make a point. Hale pulled it shut behind us, gentle like a medic. News traveled at the speed of appetite. The Academy announced a review of legacy influences on cadet discipline. Donors wrote furious letters about fairness and the flag, and were answered by lawyers who had read the transcript. A colonel I barely remembered sent an email describing a winter in Bavaria when censors saved a convoy after a thaw. He said he'd never doubted me, which was untrue, but I let him have the sentence because it might make him behave better toward the next cadet. Richard Ward's lawyer filed a response thick with verbs that tried to sound like duty and landed like fear. Contest, petition, reserve. Pending the investigation, 3 boards asked him to step down. He resigned from a 4th so he could say he chose it. Stripping honors isn't swift, and it shouldn't be. The slow process was the point, to show that institutions can correct themselves without being theatrical. My father would hate the slowness most. Nothing takes medals off a man faster than watching them take themselves. Shaw came by my apartment on a Sunday with grocery bags, and the kind of conversation that makes time behave. She didn't ask what was next, which I appreciated, because the question is often a demand clothed as interest. We cooked quietly. She took the places at the counter stool and sanitized them with a swipe of her sleeve like a field wipe, an old habit worn smooth. "When do you stop carrying it?" I asked. She shook her head. "You don't. You just change which muscle." She dropped a tissue pack on the counter, same kind she had given me 8 years ago. Same motion of her thumb along the edge, like a prayer she never named. I picked it up, felt the light crackle of the plastic, and put it in the drawer with takeout menus and string. "You okay?" she asked. "I am becoming," I said, and it was the closest to honest I knew how to put in one sentence. Hale wrote once more, on stationery too good for his hands. "If you need a witness again, I'm still 3 feet off your left shoulder." He signed it with the scrawl of a man who never learned to love pens. I taped the note to the inside of a kitchen cabinet, opposite the registrar's letter. When I boiled water for coffee, my eyes moved between them like a metronome. Witness, record. Witness, record. Caleb and I made rules, not for a foundation or a movement, just for 2 people who had stepped out of a story and needed a different one to stand in. We didn't call them anything. We wrote them on a scrap envelope and stuck it to his refrigerator with a magnet from a hardware store. Tell the truth, even when it breaks the good china. If an order contradicts physics, obey physics. Don't turn wounds into rooms. Say I don't know faster. Family is who gets you home alive. The list looked ridiculous and perfect next to a takeout coupon and a photo of us 6 years old in mud boots. He added one, in his handwriting that slants forward like a man stepping into weather. Sunrise is not a metaphor. Go outside for it. So we did. First light on a weekday. Parking lot gravel under our soles, breath visible. The horizon paled the way it always has, long before any of us learned to name it. We stood there, like new recruits and old men, and something in my chest unlatched without permission. I didn't call it healing, I called it air. A month later, the Academy invited me to a small private thing, a line in a ledger requiring a signature. An administrator with a kind face and a brittle smile slid a folder across the desk. "This corrects your academic record," she said. "It will look as if the error never occurred." We both knew that wasn't true. Paper can pretend. Bodies remember. I signed anyway, for the next time someone went looking for a reason to doubt a woman who moved left when the ground did. Walking out, we passed a current class in formation, hats straight, eyes forward. A cadet glanced at me, then away, then back again with that quick calculation people make when they think they've recognized a cautionary tale. Shaw beside me didn't break step. "Let him wonder," she said. "Uncertainty is education." We didn't hold a ceremony. We had dinner with Maria, the diner owner who never asked the wrong questions and always brought an extra plate. Different city, different woman, same refuge. She slid a pan across the table like she was pinning something to my chest. "Eat," she said. "You cannot build a future on an empty stomach." When we finished, Caleb pulled a thin frame from his bag. Inside was not a portrait, not a Foundation press release, not a citation. It was the registrar's line. Withdrawal, rescinded, cropped and plain. He hung it in his hallway where no guest could miss it. "You're ridiculous," I said, laughing. "I'm practical," he said. "Vases confuse people." We walked out to the porch, his, not ours, and watched the sky learn how to change color. The boards underfoot didn't creak. He had fixed them. I touched the rail with a small, private gratitude I didn't know where to send. My father did not call. The investigation wound its careful way through offices that dislike drama but adore documentation. Now and then I imagined him in a room, practicing a sentence that would put him on the right side of history, and then deciding to keep his creed instead. I didn't wait for outcomes to live. The slow work belonged to institutions. My quick work was different, running in the mornings, writing reports that made other people's records honest, sitting still when I wanted to prove everything twice. On a Sunday evening, Shaw knocked once and let herself in like a woman who had earned keys to whatever doors she needed. She sat, folded, breathed, then said, "One last thing." "What?" "You might be asked to forgive," she said. "Remember that forgiveness and permission are different verbs." I nodded. "What do I say if they ask?" "Say nothing," she said. "Live." I thought of the porch chair in the garage. Not discarded, not displayed. Kept because it had been real. Useless now because we had outlived it. I thought of Hale's salute captured in a transcript that would someday outlast all of us. I thought of my father's 3 words, "I will contest," shrinking in the presence of a longer sentence. "We find the AAR materially inaccurate." When the notice finally came that certain honors would be struck pending final determination, I didn't celebrate. I folded laundry. I returned a call I had avoided. I set an alarm for dawn. The world was ordinary. That felt like the point. The morning after, Caleb and I drove nowhere in particular and stopped for coffee like civilians. A teenager at the counter looked at my Orion pin and asked if it was a coin. "Something like that," I said. He gave us 2 extra creamers like a benediction. Back home, I taped our scrap rules to the inside of my own cabinet. I slipped Hale's index card behind them where only I would see. I placed the Academy letter in a folder labeled Record and slid it onto a shelf that held tax returns and title deeds and other small proofs that a life has edges. Before bed, I stood at my own porch, the one that never exiled me, and watched the dark think about lifting. The boards didn't demand anything. They were just wood. True legacy is not the myth you protect. It's the truth you dare to leave behind. I turned off the light and slept. If you believe legacy is built on truth, not lies, subscribe for more stories of courage and resilience. Before bed, I stood at my own porch, the one that never exiled me, and watched the dark think about lifting. The boards didn't demand anything. They were just wood. True legacy is not the myth you protect. It's the truth you dare to leave behind. True legacy isn't medals or myths. It's the truth that survives you. If you believe in legacies built on truth, not lies, subscribe for more stories of courage and resilience.